What's the scariest true story you've heard or told? There have been several confirmed cases in a few different countries of people living in other people's houses unbeknownst to them. I believe one case went on for a couple of years. The intruder would wait until the homeowner would go to work and then sneak out and steal small amounts of food as not to be noticed. Well, eventually the homeowner did notice and couldn't figure out where his food was going. So he set up a hidden camera to record it. I can only imagine how scary it would have been to come home from work one night and sit down to watch the video, skipping through hours of stillness, to suddenly come across a person crawling out of your attic, and then the slow realization that that person is still in your house at that moment, and then the retroactive fear of thinking back to all the times you laid awake at night and heard a noise, which you just dismissed as coming from the pipes or the old wooden beams, but actually it was a ducking person just above you. It gives me the heebie-jeebies every time I think about it. This happened to me. I was living in a sorority house with 20 other women. The house was super old and was in terrible condition. The basement had items from residents that lived there years prior, but never took their stuff. A guy was living in the basement for who knows how long. He was smart to pick our house. There were so many people that we would not notice things looking out of place because we assumed one of the women in the house just moved it / took it / ate it. One day, a girl was doing her laundry in the basement and she noticed a bed set up behind the piles of crap people left. Then she noticed the man. He said he was dating one of the girls and was just drunk and got mixed up and landed up in the basement accidentally. Anyways, she called campus police and they came to investigate and told us that he had probably been down there for a while and he was using the basement door to get in and out of the house. I don't remember if they caught him. This was about 10 years ago, so I don't remember all the details. But it was scary. There was a frat house at my school that had a room full of bunk beds that they used for people who were too drunk after parties to crash in. A homeless guy somehow found out about it and would use the window to climb up and down the fire escape, then sleep in there at night. He was there for months and nobody ever really questioned a random guy hanging around, so he would join in during parties, take showers, grab food from the fridge, even sit in when they were watching football. They finally figured it out when everyone left for winter break and he was still there in the house every day. I met a guy who had been traveling Australia with a couple friends, hitchhiking around as many of us had done. One of his friends told him they were near his distant uncle's house, whom he'd never met before. He got a phone number from a family member, and as they had hoped, the uncle offered them a place to stay. He picked them up in town and drove them out to his rural property way out in the bush. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to set up a place to sleep, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of sleeping bags and bedrolls. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed a kid and set up on the living room floor. They stayed a couple days and nothing out of the ordinary happened. And afterwards the uncle drove them to the bus station and they continued on their way. About a year later, that man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man who was picking up young hitchhiking backpackers and slaughtering them. The guy who told me this story was 100% certain he had slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims. When I was about 8 years old, our school was doing swimming lessons as part of the curriculum. My mum worked late, so we went to after school care and didn't get home until after dark. When we got home, mum asked me to take my wet togs, bathing suit, and towel out to the clothes line to dry, so I could use them the next day. I was so confident going outside to do this and had this real feeling of being a big kid. I walked into our backyard only for a man to be running at me. I screamed, jumped inside and instinctively locked the back door as I did so. As this was happening, my mum told me she heard the guy jump the gate, which was next to her bedroom, just after she heard me scream and came running to find me. I slept with the light on until I was 16. And I get my husband to go outside for me while it's dark. Lived W3 other girls sophomore year of college. All three took off early for spring break, leaving me alone in the house. First night alone, I heard someone bang on my front door at 2 AM. Then I hear more knocks at the back door. A man yells, "Boulder police, open the door." When I didn't, I heard body slams against both doors. Soon I hear, "Little girl, open the door." We know you're alone. At this point I'm so scared I keep accidentally dialing 611 instead of 911. When I eventually do get the police, cars roll up. Thankfully, just minutes later, officers have 4 boys from our school hockey team face down on the grass. I had to file restraining orders against them, and the kicker, one lived across the street from me and we'd never spoken a single word before then. I was in class in 10th grade and the teacher was asking everyone how their weekend was. The quietest girl in the class spoke, and while breaking down in tears, said she was on a trip in the mountains with her mom. They made a stop for some reason and she looked over the cliff and saw an overturned vehicle with a dead family scattered about. I recently saw an accident where the man was getting chest compressions in the middle of the highway. I really regret looking. I just keep picturing how much his chest was depressing, knowing his ribs were breaking. I was driving home from work one afternoon and came across an accident. I was one of the first people there. I got out of my car and ran over. Broken glass everywhere and there was a limp body hanging out of the driver's side window and a puddle of blood collecting under his head. I called the police, but they were just pulling up as I did. They asked me to leave, but I never found out if the driver made it. A bit of a traumatizing experience. I'm not sure I remember all the details correctly, but anyway, a guy was cleaning a giant cooking tank at a tuna factory. It was so big that he had to climb all the way in. Someone else didn't check, and protocol was broken along the way somewhere. Second guy locked the barrel and turned it on, cooking the guy inside alive. Same idea. There was 2 men who got caught in a bread oven conveyor while doing maintenance and got stuck and ended up being baked alive. One survived all the way till the end and died on the floor. One died inside. Lockout procedures exist for these exact reasons. Follow them. That bread oven story haunts me. They got in to do a repair knowing the oven was still hot, but it had been off for 24 hours at this stage, so they figured it would have cooled down enough. The company didn't want to wait longer with the line, stopped before carrying out the maintenance as it would impact on profits and production. They took out baskets that hold the raw bread on the conveyor belt, climbed onto the conveyor, and started it up. Almost straight after moving into the oven on the conveyor, the maintenance guys knew it was too hot, but they couldn't come back out because other baskets on the conveyor were blocking their way back out. The only way out for them was to continue moving the conveyor through the oven, a slow process, which was essentially baking them. Their screams could be heard initially by those outside assisting with maintenance. Then their screams stopped. One man was dead on exiting the oven at the other end. The second man died soon after. The lake bottom murders are scary as hell. Like, there are 4 teens who go on a camping trip in Finland. The next morning, 3 of the teens are found murdered, and one of them is almost dead and severely injured, but survived. No one knows who the murderer is today. 44 years later, the 4th teen, Nils, who survived, was accused of murdering them and gets sent to prison. But then he was released a year later because there was little DNA evidence to prove this, and no good evidence to prove that he murdered them at all. However, there is circumstantial evidence such as he allegedly fought his one friend due to an argument and was drunk. Some say this cold ended in accidental and or intentional murder. However, I personally highly doubt that Nils is guilty. Some other key suspects include the manager of the camp, who was known for being quite hostile, and an ice cream vendor who admitted to the crime on his teeth. There was a sketch released of the alleged murderer, who seems to be an unsettling picture of an older man. Edit: I added some information that I missed from this case, based on the replies to this. Much thanks to everyone for adding more info. When I worked in healthcare, I had a patient who got a sinus infection. He stopped taking his antibiotics after a few days because he felt better. His sinus infection came back with a vengeance. When he got to the emergency department, he was presenting with stroke symptoms. The infection had spread to his cranial cavity. There was so much pus that it was twisting his brain. No one thought he would survive the surgery. The family was advised to expect the worst. Amazingly, he actually survived. He ended up needing 3 more surgeries to wash out and spent almost 2 months in the hospital. Take your full dose of antibiotics, people. One of my friends was drugged by a nice seeming girl at a bar that tried to sex traffic her. The girl got her an Uber to an address she didn't know under the guise of get my drunk friend home, but she woke up on the way and told the driver she didn't know where they were going. They called the cops. Apparently that wasn't the first time that week they'd heard the same story and they recognized the address as one they were already tracking. If she hadn't woken up on the way she might have been trafficked by now. Apparently they use younger, safe-seeming girls to do the collecting a lot of the time. Edit. To those of you who asked. This was in the US. In Washington State a few years ago. We don't know who tried to do it. The bar was informed. To the people telling me this didn't happen, or is made up, I'm just relaying what she told me after it happened. I don't have any reason to believe she was lying about it, nor do I have anything to gain, and it'd be pretty ducked up to make up something like this. Was at a bar with my friend and got up to go to the bathroom. Took like 15 minutes to get back to her because of how long the line was, and when I get back, she was completely surrounded by this group of people I had never seen before, mainly girls and maybe one or two guys. I walked up and they all gave me a look that wasn't friendly but acted welcoming. I noticed my friend had a new drink and was suddenly much more intoxicated than when I left her. So I started saying I needed to go because I had work in the morning. The group tried to tell me to just go and she would be fine. I said no and dragged her out of the bar and started walking her home. She pretty much blacked out on the way home and I had to drag her. Luckily her neighbors were outside and came over and helped me get her inside. My friend didn't remember anything about that night and was so sick the next day. We are both convinced that group roofied her. Sounds exactly like what happened to me at a bar, and I'm a guy. Friends dragged me out to there, but I passed out after only having a few beers and pissed myself, and the police were phoned once I woke up a full 36 hours later. They got footage of the people at the bar, but not good enough to identify anyone. And no witnesses ever came forward except for my friends. I was really young too, like 19. Legal drinking age in Alberta is 18, so I was not familiar with the bar culture. Very scary experience. Edit. For those asking, I was flirting with a girl and we each got drinks. My friends were dancing. I don't like to dance, and I left the table briefly to use the washroom after she left to go check on her friends. When I got back she was there with a friend and I drank my drink as usual. Didn't taste anything out of ordinary, but then again I wasn't looking for anything suspicious. I was looking at the girl or girls. I remember wanting to go home with one of the girls until my friends realized that I was hammered and I was throwing up all over myself in the bathroom at the bar. When my friends went to look for the girls they'd left, it was very late and people were leaving in droves. And this was around 2007, so the security camera footage in a bar/club wasn't great. Very grainy and dark. I remember there being an investigation of sorts, but it didn't go anywhere at all. My parents were so mad seeing me getting dragged up the sidewalk passed out and reeking of urine by my friends at 4 AM until they realized I was roofied. They called poison control while I was out cold and yeah, I don't really remember the immediate after effects because of the drugs unfortunately. This was all relayed back to me after I was sober again. Horrifying experience. Back in the 70s, some friends and I planned a camping trip to Northern Cali for a long weekend. We packed up and headed north on the highway. Somewhere around Bakersfield we picked up a hitchhiker headed to Kernville, who we dropped off before heading further north. So we get to our campsite and start getting things set up. My GF finds a note tucked into the top of her backpack. It read, "I could have killed all of you. None of us slept that night." Co-worker's dad was babysitting his baby boy for him. At one point, Granddad went into the nursery to check on the baby and found that he'd somehow reached for the window blind strap and tangled himself up in it to the point where he was choking. Baby was already blue and all of the veins in his face had popped. Grandpa called 911 and frantically dialed 911. IMS was there in 2 to 3 minutes and they brought the little fellow back to life and he's okay now. When I was young, I saw a documentary about a guy who got flesh-eating bacteria in his nasal cavity. It ate his face and he's still alive. Eventually they removed the bacteria by removing the eaten parts of his face. He got a prosthetic face, which back in those days was basically a plastic Halloween mask that tried to look human. At the end of the documentary, he took the mask off. His face from his forehead down to his mouth was just a hole. One of my dad's friend's wife was murdered by some crazy dude walking down the street. This guy had just been released from a mental hospital and literally just stabbed her as she walked home. When my dad's friend came back, he thought she had just taken the dogs out for a walk. So he walked along the normal walk route and he saw loads of blue lights. He was stopped by a police officer and wasn't allowed any closer until he saw that it was his wife. My mother never taught me to swim because when she was a teenager she saw a friend get sucked into a whirlpool at the bottom of a drainage lake. That is the deepest body of water within a few hundred miles of us. They didn't find his body for days. Not the scariest one I've heard, but one of the scariest things to happen to me. Also in my post history in r/let's not meet. A few years ago I was living in a big city. Didn't know anyone. A guy I was seeing came from abroad to visit me. At the end of his trip I accompanied him to his train home. After that I went back into the metro to go home. It was about 2 p.m. Very bright and sunny outside. I sat down on a bench near a man. We made eye contact and I said hello. He said hello back. I felt like something was off but tried to ignore it. The metro car came and we both got inside. It was crowded. I took a seat. He took one of the only available ones, which was right across from me. I started thinking I was overreacting since he started talking to a man near me. Seemed like they knew each other. His friend got off after a few stops but he stayed. Once I saw my own stop approaching to change lines I got up. He got up too and was right behind me. I could see his reflection in the metro car window and he was very slowly looking my legs up and down. I started to feel very uneasy. The doors open. We get off. I start walking quickly to the end of the platform, then realize he might be following me. There were several entrances/exits around, so I suddenly changed direction to go to another exit. He changed course as well. Then I turned around again. He followed. I did this a few times and he changed his path to match mine each time. Fuck. Eventually I knew I had to leave somehow so he wouldn't catch up. So I went to the exit I needed to take to change lines and go home. Unfortunately the passageway to the next line was flooded with people, so I was slowed down. He caught up with me and started crowding me in, getting closer and closer to me. I was backed up against a wall at this point. Him just smiling brightly at me. Hello. How are you? He asked me, still inching towards me. I was terrified at this point. No one stopped to even glance at us, so I knew, unless I did something myself I wouldn't get away from him. I glanced to the right and saw a staircase downwards. Without warning I sprinted away to the stairs. He was very caught off guard, and it took him 2 or 3 seconds to start following me. I flew down the stairs and straight into a metro car. I turned around to see if he was close behind. He was sprinting down the stairs as well. Thankfully, the doors closed before he could get to the bottom and we pulled away. Surprisingly I had gotten onto the right metro line and direction to go home. Not that it mattered much to me at the time. That incident and several others of men following me home or in the street make me paranoid when I walk outside alone. There was a man who got out of his car after it broke down on the highway and attempted to walk across the highway to the other side late at night. He was hit by a car and his body was driven over so many times that by the time the sun came up his body parts were scattered across 300 meters of highway. Did this happen in Charlotte, NC? There was a story about this on the news a few years ago. His body was ran over so many times that people overlooked it and thought it was old roadkill. My friends and I were drinking one night and going around asking, hey, whatever happened to backslash underscore backslash underscore backslash underscore backslash underscore backslash underscore backslash underscore backslash underscore. In this case, a guy a few of us used to have an aid period with in high school. Nice kid. Googled him. I found a few sad results playing this game in the past, and there were a couple appellate court decisions visible in first few results. Turns out he went to Afghanistan, got extremely ducked up in combat. Court notes said he saw things there that completely undid him, basically, and came home with PTSD and delusional schizophrenia. Once home, He apparently has been on a mission to kill his mother, to save her from demons, and send her to heaven. He's tried and failed numerous times. Apparently, it's not just that A/B plot though. It's all the surround. We looked up his social media accounts then, and it's just threads and threads of manic rambling about demons. It was sad to find this, and not the only time I found a former classmate lost his/her mind. Unfortunately, but also terrifying to think you could be normal, then through one set of circumstances or another, become completely insane within a few years. Please click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.